From the House of the Temple in Washington, D.C., this is the Tyler's Place podcast, brought to you by the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite, Southern Jurisdiction. I'm your host, Maynard Edwards, 32nd degree KCCH. Thanks so much for joining us. As always, email us, podcast@scottishrite.org, and look for all the apps that are available in your app store right now. There's the Scottish Rite app. Search for that. It's sort of like a private label Facebook. It lets you have that social media experience with your Scottish Rite brothers without all the nonsense that goes along with Facebook. Also, we've got SR Chirp. Allows you to message brothers in your valley or valleys all across the southern jurisdiction. It's free in your app store. And the Scottish Rite Journal app. Read the journal no matter where you are. If you got some time at the doctor's office, you're waiting to get your driver's license, whatever, you can check out what's happening in the Scottish Rite Journal. All that's free in your app store right now. This month, we begin with a really remarkable story, and I was really honored to be able to talk to this brother. Joining me by phone from his home in San Antonio, Texas, is Brother Sichan Siv, 32nd degree, and his story is nothing short of extraordinary. He was born and grew up in Cambodia and is a survivor of Pol Pot's killing fields, and from that terrible place, he managed to become a deputy assistant to President George Herbert Walker Bush and an ambassador to the UN. It's unbelievable. You have to hear about it. Brother Siv, thank you for joining me. To begin with, I think that the events in the mid-'70s that took place in Cambodia sometimes get overshadowed by other things. The Vietnam War, for instance, the Middle East crisis, those things kind of overshadowed the horrors that happened in Cambodia. But the Khmer Rouge, it was a communist party led by Pol Pot, took over Cambodia in 1975, and it began a genocide that took nearly 2 million innocent lives. So this is not something we should forget about. So let's pick the story up from there, if you can, and tell us your story.
Cambodia, my country of birth, has gone through a lot of historic challenges, so to speak. The Vietnam War. Remember the Vietnam War? First, the Cambodians were fighting against the Viet Cong, and then Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese, and then against the Khmer Rouge. And finally, there was the end of the war in 1935. So the end of the war in Cambodia did not mean the beginning of peace. It was actually the beginning of a slaughter, of a massacre, of a genocide. I was supposed to be airlifted out of Cambodia on April 12th, 1935. But I missed the U.S. Embassy helicopter evacuation by 30 minutes because I was busy helping refugees that have been stranded in a province, a nearby province. I went to finalize the plan of how to feed them, to care for them. When I came to the embassy, the last helicopter had taken off 30 minutes before. So 5 days later, the Khmer Rouge came in and they turned the country upside down. They turned Cambodia into a land of blood and tears, into the killing fields. So my mother gave me her scarf, her wedding ring, and a bag of rice, and told me to run. No matter what happens, never give up hope. So hope kept me alive in some of the most difficult circumstances, and hope brought me to the United States. So I survived 1 year under the Khmer Rouge in the killing fields, being forced to work 18 hours a day, given a meal a day to eat. I went to sleep at night, never knew if I would be alive the following morning. When I woke up, I said I would make it to freedom. So on February 13, 1976, I jumped off a truck and began to run. Walk, crawl, swim, having nothing to eat or to drink for 3 days. I fell in a booby trap. I was severely wounded, but I was able to pull myself out, and I limped along until I got to Thailand. In Thailand, I was jailed for illegal entry. They realized I was a refugee, so they sent me to a refugee camp. There I taught English to fellow refugees. Many of them suffered severe mental depression because they sat around all day feeling sorry about the past, and worrying about the future. But English helped them forget their worries and the sorrows and got them ready to start their new life in an English-speaking country. So June 4th, 1936, I arrived in America, in Connecticut, a small town called Wallingford, Connecticut, with my mother's scarf, an empty rice bag, and $2. So that's my pre-USA life.
So then in 1976, you've made it to the United States. You're in a little town in Connecticut. To pick up the story from there and tell us about your life after arriving here in the States.
No, Maynard, I've been here for over 40 years. So my life, I lived in America longer than anywhere else outside of anywhere else in the world. This is my life, and after I arrived in 1976, I tried to forget a painful past and just look. I just want to look towards a better future. So I did everything that came my way to the best of my ability. I picked apples in Connecticut. I drove a taxi in New York. I got a master's degree from Columbia, thanks to a scholarship. And I just did everything until I went to work at the White House 13 years after I arrived in America. That could happen only thanks to the goodness of the American people and a great tribute to George H.W. Bush that I made it that far in such a short time. It could not happen anywhere else in the world.
In 2006, you became a Freemason. What brought you to the craft and why?
I came here knowing not a single human being, and I make friends every day, and I keep them. So wherever we go, wherever we've been to, we always make friends. And this friend of mine has been like a mentor to me. And we meet occasionally, and one day he showed me a sheet of paper with a picture of all the famous Masons, George Washington, Mozart, Douglas MacArthur, and Buzz Aldrin, and so on and so forth. And I look at the picture, I said, my goodness, this is quite a distinguished group of people. And he told me that these are Freemasons. And he looked at me, he said, Sichan, you have lived the life of a Freemason. Because that's what I've been doing since I came to America in 1976. I just try to build my new life and also to serve other people. And that was strengthened even more when I arrived at the White House, when President Bush said any definition of a successful life must include serving others. So that's, in a sense, it's a life of service that I have been living. And that's how I got into Freemasonry. I said, what do I need to do? So I petitioned, and I trained. I moved from entered apprentice to Master Mason in 4 months.
Wow, that is quick.
Yes, and I really enjoyed very much my education. I think this is probably the most education I had received so far in my life. And the Scottish Rite added to the foundation that I have had in the Blue Lodge. So I really feel very blessed to be a Scottish Rite Mason.
You have a book out that details your fascinating story even more. Tell me about the book.
The book is called Golden Bones. Golden Bones. Golden Bones are terms that the people of Cambodia use to refer to somebody who is very blessed, who is very lucky. And I feel that I am a person of golden bones. I think all of us here in America, in the United States, we are all people of golden bones because we are lucky, we are blessed to be Americans. And I think you and I are even more blessed to be Scottish Rite Masons.
So mote it be. Brother Sichan Siv, 32nd degree, from the killing fields to the White House, to the United Nations, to the Scottish Rite. A remarkable brother. This is the Tyler's Place podcast. I'm Maynard Edwards.
This is the Tyler's Place with your host, Maynard Edwards.
Joining us on the Tyler's Place podcast is Brother Mark Oldknow, 33rd degree, from the Valley of Santa Fe. He is our educational correspondent. Last month addressing the wise fool, as we were in the month of April appropriately. This month, Brother Mark discusses something a little more heavenly, and that is the angels. Brother Mark?
Angels have been a symbol for a very long time, of course. I mean, you can look in the Old Testament where they're replete. We have Gabriel in the Garden of Eden and the Genesis stories. But angels also show up in different contexts and different numbers and different phases in the book of Job and Daniel and Tobias, in many instances playing pivotal roles, particularly in the story of Daniel. The way that we understand angels kind of in the modern vernacular was really put together by a guy in the 5th century, a Christian by the name of, and this is one of my favorite names in all of history, Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite. He's the one who put together what I call the Kabbalistic hierarchies. So he created the lists of all of the angels and then related them and kind of categorized them as archangels and regular angels, and it's pretty complicated. For our purposes, that's not really the level of detail that we need to get lost in. But it is worth knowing that really was developed and consolidated the way we understand angels these days in the 5th century. For our purposes, as Scottish Rite Masons, I think it's important to recognize that angels have played a role in the symbolism that we're interested in. For instance, within Kabbalah, there's an archangel referred to as Adam Kadmon, who is the archangel associated with the first sphere, the sphere of Kether. If not really actually by dint of being the archangel of the first sphere, he's really the archangel of the entire tree. And he's often depicted with his head in Kether, his feet in Malkuth, and he literally represents the tree integrated into the human form. We see angels in other places. Historically, the Hebrews believed that nations or any large group had a guardian angel. From this, we derive the notion of a guardian of the threshold, so somebody who guards borders. The Romans had an imperial cult of the emperor, and Augustus was considered an angel, not his raw person, but his higher self, what he represented. This is an important distinction. The Romans didn't believe, again, that the emperor himself was necessarily in his body divine, but his soul and his intent, his higher purpose, was a divinity. In the rabbinical schools, again, building off of Kabbalah, there's another famous angel by the name of Layla. Indeed, within that tradition, she's the only feminine angel. And she represents night and the act of conception. She escorts the soul to and from life and the afterlife. And, of course, just within the American traditions, who could forget the famous angel Clarence Oddbody, who helped George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life and eventually got his wings. So angels kind of cover a broad range of our culture and our work. But again, they're mysterious things. How are they useful to us as Scottish Rite Masons? Well, Pike suggests in Morals and Dogma, the 3rd chapter, the chapter on Master Masons, or the Master, he reminds us that Pythagoras suggested that and I'm quoting from him, the hierarchical order always manifests by threes. So if we look at the relationship between man and God, we would expect in the hierarchy that there's some intermediary. There's something that represents the mean, the relationship between man and God. Three indeed is the number of relationship. And it's that sense of the guardian angel represents that intermediary. The St. Thomas Aquinas equated the soul as a higher self. And he coined the word genius in relationship to it. So he looks at the soul as being kind of a higher genius of who we are. It's a part of our identity that our everyday selves don't often identify with. It's a part of us. It's the best of who we are, if you will. And most of the time, lost in the everyday, workaday world, we don't often look up. We don't often look at the higher aspects of who we are. We get lost in the work and the frustrations and the stuff that goes on every day. But there's always this higher part of ourselves that really represents the connection, the medium between us and God. It's interesting indeed that the word genius comes from the same root of the Latin word gens, that we get the notion of tribe or people is what it meant in Latin, but we also get the word genetics from. So we can begin as a tool as Scottish Rite Masons to understand that this notion of a guardian angel as an intermediary, as that third principle in the hierarchy that relates man and God together, we can understand that then an angel, when we see or conceptualize it as an externalized angel, an entity that's almost somehow outside of ourselves, that angel serves to guard or to protect us. But as we develop, as we meditate on our relationship to God, as that angel becomes more internalized and integrated into who and what we are, we recognize that it's not a thing outside of us. It's an aspect or a face of our own selves in the mirror. It is our soul. The guardian angel is us. It's our soul operating in its highest form. And in that sense, it's not so much a guardian as it is the guide. So by way of meditation, can you, brethren, can you find that higher sense of who you are? Can you point to those parts of yourself that either in motion, in action today, or in where you want to be, where you want to develop yourself, are becoming alive, or becoming a living part of who and what you are? So as Scottish Rite Masons, we always try to learn. If we can learn, we try to improve ourselves. And one of the tools, one of the symbols that helps us to take that journey is the guardian angel. And last but not least, for what it's worth, if anybody's interested, the Catholic feast day of the guardian angel is the 2nd of October. So maybe a good day, if you're not doing anything other, to pause and sit in your meditations and give thanks for the relationship that you have with the divinity.
That's Brother Mark Oldknow, 33rd degree from the Valley of Santa Fe, our educational correspondent here on the Tyler's Place podcast. If you've got something you want Mark to dig into or talk about on the podcast, send us a message, podcast@scottishrite.org. This is the Tyler's Place. It is time for Tyler's Trivia with our Grand Archivist, the one and only Arturo de Hoyos, the traveling man. I know that you have been about. I know as we record this, our friend Brent Morris is in London. You're just getting back from a much more exotic locale, Alabama.
Well, certainly much more exotic, yes. I was in Birmingham, just got back last night.
Hey, you know what? People can make fun, but I will guarantee you the barbecue in Birmingham is better than the barbecue in London.
No question about it, and I ate as much of it as I could while I was there.
I'll bet you did. So tell me about that trip. You know, when you go on these things, you speak and you talk about not only Masonry, your books and things. I always encourage people to give you a hard time about movies and whatever else as well. So if you get those questions, those are coming from me telling people to bother you about it.
Great. Well, I was invited to speak at a lodge, most of the members of which were Scottish Rite Masons. The Grand Master came out to hear me speak to make sure that everything I was saying was correct, of course. I was happy to have him in the audience, as was the Grand Tyler, I believe, also. But it was a lot of fun. I spoke on Monday night, and there was a good crowd there. And after my presentation, which was on the origin of the high degrees and their connection to the Scottish Rite, remember that the first high degree in Freemasonry is really the Master Mason's degree. Appears in 1725, as far as we know. 8 years after that, the Scots Master degree, and that's really where we get our Scottish Rite tradition coming out of there.
Do you have a favorite Masonic reference in film?
Oh my gosh!
I know there's so many. There's tons.
There are too many, but still, I'm kind of a sucker, so I would have to say that it's the Craft, Danny, the Craft, in The Man That Would Be King.
Now, I knew you'd say The Man That Would Be King. There was a version of Sherlock Holmes that came out in the 70s with Rathbone in it, and
the Murder by Decree one.
I think so, yeah. And where he does this whole bizarre handshake thing, and
the secret ring.
It bears no resemblance to anything Masons would ever do, but it was just so much fun to see.
Well, it bears resemblance, every bit as much resemblance as the secret handshake of Masons and Monty Python's Flying Circus, if you remember that.
Now, I'm jumping into the nerd realm for a moment. I am preparing to be a traveling man myself. I'm going to, on Thursday, leave to go to California, and I'm going to visit a couple of our valleys while I'm there, but I'm also going to be initiated into the Invisible Lodge.
Ooh.
Yeah, I'm taking nerdiness to a whole other level.
That's pretty cool, and as we all know, that's only for people who are practicing magicians.
And I'm practicing.
Okay.
Just let that be known. I am practicing.
But you're still visible. So.
I'm currently visible, but I'm hoping that they will teach me to be invisible. So we'll have a full report on that when I get back. Should be a lot of fun.
Well, I did just return from California. I guess it was about 3 weeks ago. And whilst there, I was with a couple of my good friends and discovered, or I shouldn't say I discovered, I did learn that our friend and brother Joe Wages, working with Johnny Royale, is going to have their documentary on the Illuminati released in July. I think they said July 25th. It'll open in 500 theaters, and it'll be the first time that there has been an authentic documentary on the Bavarian Illuminati. It'll have some reenactment of the ritual, discussion of the purposes, and from what I understand is that after the theatrical release, that sometime in September or something like that, there will be a release also on Netflix. So look forward to that, because these are smart guys. The clips that I've seen are pretty darn good. Johnny's a pretty good filmmaker. He's a really good guy. And I'm just really looking forward to seeing this. There's so much nonsense about the Illuminati that's out there, and our friend Adam Kendall will be in it. As I said, Joe Wages is really the brains behind this, but with Johnny as the filmmaker. But I mean, a bunch of good Masons involved in it, and you can look forward to learning and enjoying it.
So let's get into our question. This is a carryover, and we did have some winners on this. The question was, what is the Masonic connection for every U.S. president from Andrew Jackson to Andrew Johnson? Nice alliteration there.
Well, the answer would be, drum roll please, Benjamin B. French. He knew every one of the presidents. He's the guy that organized Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, finished the U.S. Capitol. I believe he laid the cornerstone for the Washington Monument, and much more. And he was quite the guy here in Washington. He held a number of important positions, and was a friend of Albert Pike. And he actually presented Pike with a sword in August, I think it was, of 1861. Remember that the Civil War began July 21st, 1861. And when Pike was commissioned a general, Benjamin French, a Northerner, gave Albert Pike, a Southerner, a sword in honor of that, which is pretty darn cool when you think about it, because Freemasonry has always had the power to transcend borders, whether real or artificial, and it was just as, a mark of esteem. In fact, we're going to have a formal presentation of that sword here in just a couple of weeks at the House Temple. Is it next weekend or something? I think so. Yep, coming up next week, and that will be on display here at the House of the Temple. But the man was Benjamin B. French. Now, I'll make one more comment about him. Is my favorite Mason. I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of times people assume my favorite Mason is Albert Pike, but they would be wrong.
Right.
My favorite Mason is, in fact, Giles Fonda Yates from Schenectady. And it was Yates who actually conferred the Scottish Rite degrees on Benjamin B. French up through the 32nd degree. And French received his 33rd, of course, from the Southern jurisdiction.
French is one of those characters in American history that sort of kind of lingers in the background of a lot of things. You know, you notice his hand in a lot of different things. He was never the president. He was never a big head of state or anything of that nature. But you find him in a lot of unsuspecting places.
Well, he was the commissioner of public buildings in Washington, D.C., and as such, you would think, that he would add a lot of influence, and he did. He knew everybody, not just the presidents, but he was one of those guys that if he needed something done in Washington, you could get it done through him.
This is an interesting character, and you would do yourself well to do a little research about our friend and brother, Benjamin B. French. So we have got that question out of the way, and we'll hand off some autographed copies of some of your fantastic books. Let's get into the question for the month of May 2019.
Who is it who received credit for the important revisions to the Northern Masonic jurisdiction rituals during the mid-1800s?
That's very specific.
It is very specific. Who received credit for it?
Who received credit? Not who actually did it. Who received the credit for the revision of the Northern Masonic jurisdiction rituals in which era again?
In the mid-1800s.
Mid-1800s. Yeah. There we go.
He would have been the person upon whose ritual work the other rituals followed. So the one who received credit for that, actually.
Excellent. If you know the answer, you know how to do it. Podcast at ScottishRite.org, or connect with us on the various Scottish Rite apps, including SR Chirp or the Scottish Rite app. Do that, and those answers will all be considered, and the right answer will be chosen from amongst all the correct answers we receive to get one of Art's books autographed just for you. And by the way, I just wanted to say, if you do not listen to the podcast right away, don't worry, you still have an equal chance.
That's right, because we don't select a winner until just before the podcast. So, vote early and vote often.
Well, Art and I are going to return to our various places. He is going to return to his invisibility in the Grand Archive. I will return to the Invisible Lodge, and we'll connect with you guys next month. So thanks, man.
Sounds good.
That's going to wrap it up for the May 2019 edition of the Tyler's Place podcast. Don't forget, you've got questions, comments, ideas, send them to me, podcast at ScottishRite.org. We're always anxious to read your email. And yes, I will be doing a special all about the Invisible Lodge and let you guys in on some behind the Invisible Lodge doors secrets, if I can. We'll talk about that and a whole lot more next time right here on the Tyler's Place.
If you're interested in becoming a Freemason or in joining the Scottish Rite, email us at podcast@ScottishRite.org.